There is absolutely no evidence, and every economist will tell you this, that there is any job loss related to the Affordable Care Act. Part-time positions are actually down since 2010, not up. The number of full-time workers continues to increase. So I know that that's a popular myth that continues to be repeated, but it just is not accurate.
Oh, really? Well, that was Kathleen Sebelius denying jobs will be lost as a result of Obamacare, despite the report from the government's bean counters, the CBO, revealing that up to 2.5 million jobs are on the line. So what's she talking about? Let's talk to an actual economist and the former director of the Congressional Budget Office, Douglas Holtz-Eakin. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
What's your message to the Secretary of Health and Human Services there? She says that every economist knows that's not true.
She shouldn't go into website development. She shouldn't go into economic consulting. Look, this is pretty simple. If you step back and you look at what the Affordable Care Act does, it raises about $800 billion in taxes. It's imposed about $500 billion in regulatory costs. Does that sound like a recipe for jobs? Right. Then it hands out $1.5 trillion in subsidies for people whether they work or not, and they leave the labor force. CBO saying 2.5 million jobs gone. It's indisputable that this is bad for economic growth, bad for jobs.
You know, the intention was good. You know, there are people who have fallen through the safety net and they need help with health care. That's great. But it seems to completely have run off the rails.
It's a classic case of unintended consequences. You put on the you say, let's do health policy. But that health policy has all these taxes, all these regulations. It affects every employer. It affects every household. It has to affect the economy. And they didn't keep track of the growth consequences. And so the jobs are being lost. And now they're really starting to realize this.
Was this part, is part of the responsibility of the fact that the White House pretty much farmed everything out to Nancy Pelosi? You guys over in the House, you figure out this bill, and I'll sign it.
That's part of the problem. The way it was put together also, it's got tons and tons of inconsistencies and problems and technical failures. It's a mess, and everyone knows that. And now we're now starting to see the consequences. And you see the administration. About every 6 months, something gets waived, something gets delayed, pushed back. There's been no evidence of part-time jobs, in part because every time they came up to the employer mandate, they said, no, we don't really want to do that. And so there's no part-time jobs yet.
Right. Let's talk about the headline from yesterday, and that is the Congressional Budget Office came out and they said, well, if the president gets his wish and you jack up the minimum wage to $10.10, up to 1 million jobs will be lost. Then the White House came out and said, we don't believe that's really going to happen.
The White House is just at odds with the facts and common sense here. Every time there's been a serious research study that looked at the kinds of people who get affected by the minimum wage, low-skilled workers, teenagers, they find that it harms employment. So we get 500,000 to 1 million jobs lost. But the really striking part of the CBO report was this does nothing for poverty. It raises about $31 billion for low-wage workers. Only 19% of it goes to people in poverty. And there are 45 million Americans in poverty. 900,000 get helped. So this is a puny effort. And the White House is pumping it up as a big deal.
There's a brand new poll that came out, I believe it was yesterday. It was from Gallup. The number one thing people in this country are worried about is unemployment. You look at Obamacare, that could cost up to 2.5 million jobs. You look at this particular thing, jacking up the minimum wage to $10.10, it could cost 1 million. There's 3.5 million jobs right there down the dumper if both these things go through.
Absolutely. And if you care about poverty, and the White House says we care about poverty, the number one thing you should care about is jobs. The dividing line between being poor and not poor in the U.S. is having a job. And so hurting jobs hurts the poverty.
But we know it's at play here. The president doesn't want to talk about the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare because, you know, as people get an eye on it, they realize this thing is not a good idea and it's hurting a lot of people. So what they're trying to do is distract people in advance of the elections in November so that they won't punish the Democrats.
Get by the elections at all costs. That's their strategy. They'll change the rules if they have to. They'll argue about the results of a CBO study, which is pretty common sense when you get right down to it. That's all election year politics. And we're going to see more, not less, in the months to come.
All right. The former director of the CBO, Douglas Holtz-Eakin, thank you very much.